It's definitely not a luxury anymore if it becomes a commodity. Mm-hmm. And so I've been thinking for a while about what does it mean to be the successor to people analytics. And I think it's people intelligence. So people intelligence is essentially the collapsing of the tree. All of people analytics, all of workforce planning, all intelligence, and all of behavioral science, I'm calling a singular intelligence layer, right? And that intelligence layer is people intelligence that is built on the roots of that tree, which is the data layer.
Welcome back to the Science for Work podcast, where we explore evidence-based insights from IO psychology and HR management to help make work better. I'm your host, Matt Lampy. Today's guest is Cole Napper, returning to the show in a new role. Cole was recently appointed Chief People Intelligence Officer at HR Bench. He holds a PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. He's the founder and host of the Directionally Correct podcast and author of People Analytics, using data-driven HR and Gen AI as a business asset. Beyond his corporate roles, Cole is deeply committed to advancing the people analytics profession. If you work in the IO, HR, or people analytics space, it's likely you already know him. If you don't, you're about to. In this conversation, Cole makes a provocative case that people analytics as we've known it has become a commodity, and what comes next is something he calls people intelligence. We get into what that actually means, why he thinks AI is forcing a rebuild of HR from first principles, and a concept of tokenomics that could reshape how we approach workforce planning over the next few years. This is a forward-looking conversation. Some of what Cole is articulating is ahead of where the research has caught up, but it's worth listening to. Not because it's settled, but because this is where the field is heading. Let's get into it. Cole, welcome back to the Science for Work podcast.
I hope you get to say that often, Matt. Do you welcome people back for a second time very frequently?
Not yet, although there's been a handful of people that we've had some really good conversations, and I'm looking forward to bringing them back. We'll kind of expand out the scope a little bit, bring in some other analogies. There's one guest that we had recently that wants to come back and kind of present things through a sports frame, and I'm like, you get me talking about sports, that's a good day.
I think I know who it is. I think I listened to that episode.
You probably do, yep. Well, so since last time we talked, you were talking about people analytics, and you are a knowledge source, thought leader in that space. And recently you posted something on LinkedIn that you've taken on this new role, Chief People Intelligence Officer. And you followed that with more to come or more to follow or something like that.
Yeah.
And immediately it piqued my interest because I went, what is the work that comes with that? And how is this an elevation of people analytics? I'm really intrigued to see how you are moving that practice forward, what it looks like with, applying all of the science and the practice in this new thing. So let's start there. What is people intelligence framing?
Chief People Intelligence Officer. I gotta get it right, Matt.
No. My apologies, Chief.
So I most recently been the VP of Research and Workforce Intelligence at Lightcast, which is probably what we talked about last time. And then I've joined HR Bench. So they're a company in this space that's really looking to kind of disrupt the status quo of what's going on in kind of that people analytics sphere. So last year I wrote an article called The Tree of Value, which featured pretty prominently in the third chapter of my book, People Analytics, which talked about how people analytics, talent intelligence, workforce planning, and behavioral science were all branches to the same tree, right? And that was sort of like, I actually didn't feel like it was that radical, but I feel like a lot of people who read it were like, oh my gosh, this was so eye-opening. I didn't realize this. And I said the roots of the tree were the value of human capital labor data. A lot's happened since that happened. Because that was when I was actually writing that. That was almost, it was over a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. And so just by the nature of when things get published over time and there's always a lag period, it's been quite some time and a lot has changed. And as a part of that LinkedIn post that you referenced, Matt, I said that people analytics has now become a commodity. It had been on that train for a while. It had been tracking in that direction. But I think the big moment of truth for me personally, there was this Claude Code and Claude Cowork release in December of 2025. And then I put together a post not long ago that showed how there was a plugin to Excel now using Claude, and you could automate end to end a dashboard and the entire kind of research process with a single prompt in about 5 minutes, because it took about 5 minutes for that to run, and all of the formulas populated, all the data was correct. It went over multiple tabs in Excel, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is a phase shift that I don't think people realize. I posted about it on LinkedIn. I posted on my Substack. It was by far the most viewed post I've ever had. All right, like orders of magnitude larger. And it made me realize that the democratization that we had talked about for years of analytics data had finally happened. Like this was the moment. This is it.
So it
People
tipped.
analytics is no longer like I'd given a presentation 3 or 4 years ago at a conference called "Is People Analytics a Luxury?" Right, and it's definitely not a luxury anymore if it becomes a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been thinking for a while about what does it mean to be the successor to people analytics. And I think it's people intelligence. So people intelligence is essentially the collapsing of the tree. All of people analytics, all of workforce planning, all intelligence, and all of behavioral science, I'm calling a singular intelligence layer, right? And that intelligence layer is people intelligence that is built on the roots of that tree, which is the data layer.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And what's happening is, people analytics is usually focused on internal data, talent intelligence is usually focused on external data, behavioral science is usually focused on human beings and kind of their psychology, and then the workforce planning is usually looking today, 90 days into the future, a year into the future, 3 or 5 years into the future, depending on the kinds of workforce planning. But no part of HR was singularly focused on the entirety of all of those things at once. And I think because of how AI is disrupting the field, a lot of the basics of all of those are becoming commoditized overnight. And so that all is going to be left is the data layer, the intelligence layer, and then the value add that human beings bring to the HR function in new ways because of intelligence. So I'll pause there. I've been talking a lot. Where do you want to go with this?
At first, it sounded a little bit like it was an evolution of people analytics.
I don't know if it's an evolution or a revolution. I'm not quite sure. It's pretty new. And I think I've been saying lately that I'm not sure our lexicon has kept up with what needs to change. All that I said in that post is like, if you're an innovator, if you're a person who likes to challenge the status quo, if you want to shape what's to come and not just react to it, reach out and let's talk. Because the work that I'm doing at HR Bench is really fundamentally there to challenge that narrative about what things were and to kind of build out the future. I'm not saying I know all of what the future holds, but I want to be on the journey and I want to be proactive with it. And I'm looking for kind of those fellow travelers that are looking to do the same thing.
So one of the things with organization development, for example, there's a lot of emphasis on a systems approach or systems lens. And that's kind of what it sounds like you're describing here, is that it's not just getting the data insights. It's not just looking at this component or that component. It's like you said, compressing that. It's bringing them all into one. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that was the lot. Like I always, one of my thought experiments I always try to do is like in the limit. What do you think
Mm-hmm.
about something if you just extended in the limit? Like, what would it look like? And I think that's what we're talking about here is always with HR data. Fundamentally, it was supposed to be the pooling of the resources together in terms of the data and the technology and building a system that then served the entirety of an organization, its employees, its leadership, its board, everything that went into that process. And the reality was it had fragmented in multiple ways in organizations. But in the limit, it's a singular thing. What is that singular thing? In my opinion, it's people intelligence, and it's AI's transformation of the HR function that is making that possible for the first time.
Do you know of organizations that are doing this? Like, is this something that's out there? Because, like I said, right before we hit the record button, I saw your post and I was immediately intrigued by, okay, what is this title? I'd only seen it a handful of places, but even the places where I've seen it has not been in an official capacity of this is what an organization is doing. It's been more of the hypothetical of we could imagine something like this, but you've gone beyond that imagining and you've actually put it into practice, or you're putting it into practice. Are there other organizations that are doing that you know of?
The reality is, I think the term people intelligence, because I've done a little bit of digging as well. I think it is a nascent term would be a generous way of putting it. I'm pretty sure I'm the only chief people intelligence officer out there. There may be somebody in some foreign land who that I've never come across before that is working with this title, but I think I'm the only one. The reality is, human beings, we like creating order in our minds, and it's great to bucket things. And so if large enterprises, which I think would have been the places where this type of function would have existed, have already over specialized and over fragmented their functions, because I see this as a collapsing, right? So what happened was, with the proliferation of technology and data over the last, let's say, 15 years, you've seen the hyper specialization. That is a fragmentation process. From a systems perspective, what I think is going on is a collapsing process. And like I mentioned earlier, the collapsing is going to happen into two different layers. It's the intelligence layer and the data layer. That's it. Everything else is going to be, frankly, OD type of work that you're engaging in, Matt.
It's interesting that you went to large organizations, because when you were talking about this, I thought, well, this sounds like opportunities for small organizations. You don't have to have 20,000 people on 5 different teams. You can have 2 or 3 core essential people that are using these tools and these technologies, combining that with the research, with the data, with the practices, and then and streamline. I don't know if streamlining is the right word, but simplifying or streamlining the processes.
When I think about it, like you're absolutely right with that line of questioning, Matt. Because if you're trying to rebuild an HR function from first principles today, would you build it the same way? And I think the answer is radically no.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're right to say that large organizations are at the most competitive disadvantage, just because they're probably going to have to deconstruct themselves even more than newcomers. And I think that creates an exciting time if you are a newcomer. If you are that type of person who are out there, I want to hear from you, because you're on this journey as that type of fellow traveler. But the reality is, if you had to build, let's say you're a 5,000 person company, right? And you had to reconstruct HR from first principles today, it's going to look radically different than it did 5 years ago. And I think a lot of the same questions still persist as to, do you really want to vibe code your way into building everything like your core HCM or something like that? That's probably a little too radical for this moment. But how could you create, again, that data layer, that intelligence layer, and then have the specialization cadre of human beings that could go out and do key things while enabling your workforce through things like agents, through different technologies that are built that were kind of the friction points in the past that are just either easy, free, or cheap in the future.
So, with ScienceForWork, we really want to connect to a lot of the research, right?
Yeah.
And
I'm afraid there's not a lot of research in the space, Matt.
That was going to be my question is, so what does it look like to take that step to be going down this revolution when there isn't a lot of research behind it? How are you integrating some of that into your practices so that it stays aligned? And that the Claude example that you posted about, I remember reading that, and I've seen similar posts sharing success stories of how technology has streamlined a lot of the processes and it's verified. We go back and we check the numbers, we check the data. And on the other side of that coin, stories where people say, a company trusted this AI tool, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, it was hallucinating. So when you are leading this aspect of this next progression,
Yeah.
how do you stay aligned with the science when there isn't a lot of it out there to base it off of?
I'm probably going to go a few different directions here, if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, go for it.
Remind me, because I want to come back to something that we recently did through PSYOP and the CHRO Association. So if I don't come back there, remind me to come back there, because I think it's very relevant to your question.
Making a
I
note of
think
that right now.
we have to go back to, like, how does science happen? And science starts with a hypothesis and a research question. But what it doesn't actually start there. It actually starts with a human being having the idea to have a research question and a hypothesis to test. Right? Now, where does that human being get that idea? And again, I'm kind of going sort of 30,000 foot here for a second. They get that idea usually by experiencing some kind of new catalyst in the world that causes them to have an idea that other people have not had before. Right? So then you realize, like, okay, the catalyst is usually something environmental that has changed. And that is leading a human being to say, ooh, I have a new set of things that I'd like to test in the world, and I need to go out and collect data to test that. I need to consult the literature, obviously, if it exists, but what if it doesn't exist? Right?
Yeah.
And so then it's almost, as a researcher, it's almost incumbent on you to create the research that does not exist. Right? So you can draw from the best that you can do sometimes is you pull from the theory that you think is relevant, you pull from adjacent research. So there's lots and lots of research that has been done on what you might call traditional machine learning, right? That is something that you can draw from. But the reality is, somebody's got to be willing to be the first monkey shot into space, right? They just have to be.
I love
And I
the
think this
visual
is
that
something that the
provides.
scientific enterprise does not like to acknowledge very much. Is like, there are fundamentally people out there that are kind of the early adopters, and then there are the fast followers, and then there's the big hump in the middle, and then there's the laggards, right? And fundamentally, it's usually the people that are carving new territory out that are the ones that are doing the first types of research. There's even the whole concept of a paradigm shift, is when science is on kind of one branch of the tree. They realize that branch of the tree is no longer fruitful. They go into a new branch, but there's not a lot to draw from on that new branch. And so I'm saying, fundamentally, at this moment, we are trying to go on a new branch of the tree. And so, again, this is why I'm so curious to find fellow travelers. And I'm so happy to work for an organization like HR Bench that is going to be fully supportive of, like, contributing what we find to the scientific enterprise. That is exciting to me. And so at this point, I want to come back to, it just got released, and that's why I feel comfortable sharing it, that there was a partnership between the PSYOP Foundation and the CHRO Association, which were answering kind of this question, which is, CHROs are saying, we want to use research to do AI transformation effectively at our organizations. PSYOP, as an organization, can you provide for us this research? And the thing that we found through that process is, it's slim pickings. There's not a lot to draw from. And so what we were trying to do in the process is, we gave them through a combination of a variety of really, really smart people. I'm not doing them justice, but Emily and Michael Campion, Neil Morelli, Fred Oswald, a lot of Nancy Tippins was chairing the effort, but I'm forgetting people's names, and I apologize for that. But they're all a part in the index at the end of that report that got shared. Really just like star-studded lineup of people in the field in terms of researchers. But the reality is, what we need to do was just to say, here's how you might consult scientifically when vendors put forward new AI tools, how you might validate them. And here's what we have in terms of research on traditional AI and machine learning. But the reality is, there's a lot of things that are left for the scientific enterprise to cover. And another thing that's really challenging is, the cycle times for AI development and the cycle times for research publishing have diverged greatly. And so typically, if you're lucky, you can publish something in 2 years in a scientific journal.
Yep.
AI is transforming like every 3 to 6 months. And so even if you took the first wave of AI publications that came out since ChatGPT is launched, they're running on like Chat GPT 4.0 or whatever. What I can't even remember what it was back then. It feels like it was eons ago. And the results that you get from that research are completely irrelevant to the things that are happening today. And so you really, if you want to stay on the bleeding edge, you kind of have to be willing to have skin in the game as you go through the process. And that's what we're doing at HR Bench.
That's awesome. You are being that monkey that gets shot into space.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm going back to that visual.
I
That's
love
what's
it.
stuck in my head. The other thing though that I love about this is it doesn't sound like it's just changing the practice in application, but all the research behind it. You are part of that group, and the individuals that you mentioned there, and the papers, the research that was put out with PsyOp, is trying to push forward the industry as a whole,
Yes.
and doing research just for the sake of doing research and having it published and sit on a shelf. Cool, you get a gold star, but if that doesn't translate into practical application, sort of what was the benefit of it? And this effort, this collective effort, sounds like it's trying to do both of those things at once, and it's impressive, it's intriguing, it's exciting,
Well, I
and
mean,
for
I'll say something even more
yeah,
radical. And this is something that we came across as a part of doing that research with SciOp and the CHRO Association, is we found out that there's a lot of these, I don't know if companies is the right way of putting it, because sometimes it's like consortiums and things like this, but they're putting out their own AIs that do research for you, like end to end. Like they have taken every academic journal, they have embedded research methodology into the tools. Presumably, I have not vetted these tools. I don't know how effectively they work. I'm not endorsing them in any way. But what I am saying is that the whole concept of how science runs is also currently being disrupted right now with AI, and we do not know the consequences of this, right?
right,
And so
yeah,
the kind of the old tapes that you and I have playing in our minds about like how to do science, they're probably outdated too.
yep, yeah, and this is changing that. That's exciting. Let's flip over to the end client.
Yeah.
What does it look like for that end organization who starts to embed some of these things? Not the ones that are building their own AI, because again, I don't know what the research is on that. I'm more curious the application side. So, for example, the work that you're doing in this new enterprise.
Yeah. Well, can I give like a belief structure before I get into kind of the tactics of it?
Absolutely.
I think I just have a belief, and again, this is unfalsifiable in some way, but that human beings play a role in the future, right? And that humans are core to how work occurs. Like I'm just not one of these people that believes that like AGI is just around the corner and nobody's ever going to work again, and intrinsic motivation's not real, and that like human beings don't get enjoyment and pleasure out of doing these types of things, and so I just like I fundamentally at my core believe that, and so everything I say after that is under that belief that human beings are going to play a role in the workplace, right? Some people don't believe that, and so they come to vastly different conclusions. And so I think you have to kind of argue with them on their merits of what their belief structure is before you can even talk about the tactics. I think tactically, if you believe that human beings play a role in work, I want to be able to create in the intelligence that's going to say when is a human best applied and when is technology best applied, and in simplest form. And I want data in science to inform those decisions. And again, that's going to crop up in countless different use cases and countless different ways and many different industries and the like. But at its basis, it's saying what roles do humans play at work? And that's from a traditional analytics perspective, a traditional workforce planning perspective, a traditional, taking the external labor market data from a talent intelligence perspective, and from a behavioral perspective, all of those things that I mentioned in the tree of value.
Mm-hmm.
It's answering all of those questions, but also, and equivalently, which I think is a really important sticking point, having data sources that measure human beings as accurately as you measure technology who's doing similar work, and vice versa,
Tell me
right?
more.
And so what I mean by that is like, let's say you turn over a workflow to an AI agent or series of AI agents working in conjunction with one another. Do you have equivalent data to measure the output, the throughput, the inputs, the flow, the error rate, the quality, all of those things as you would had that workflow been accomplished by humans or
Okay.
humans in conjunction with technology, right? You need to have equivalent data sources. And I think this is what a lot of organizations are missing from the equation about doing what I've been calling AI workforce transformation is they think that they need to have all this data to quantify their human beings, but just trust the AI implicitly. It's like, no, you need to have equivalent data sources. And then because of that equivalency, then you can best create deployment mechanisms for saying, here's how we deploy humans, here's how we deploy processes, and here's how we deploy technology.
So what does that transition look like?
Say more.
I'm an organization that has our traditional HR
Yeah.
and our business partners and our people analytics. You know, we're that large
You're
company
the thing
that's
that would need to be deconstructed. So at first,
yep.
what you're looking for is kind of like a Pareto analysis of the highest impact, lowest kind of disruption use cases to tackle, right? That if you're deconstructing, you're looking at like saying, okay, like maybe it's recruiting. I don't know, right? But end to end, recruiting is the biggest pain point for us, and it's the one where AI augmentation could help out the most, right? So that's what you're looking for if you're deconstructing. If you're constructing for the first time, like those small to medium sized companies, then you're looking to say, you're almost like architecturally, you're saying, how can we architect our entire workforce? You're probably starting with things like job architecture, the basics of the data, the basics of the technology, creating processes for the first time, right? And what role do humans play? What role does technology play, right? If you're in that kind of like that muddy middle ground, you're probably doing a little bit of both. Maybe you don't have a mature performance management process, but you have been paying people with compensation for years, right? So you're going to be looking to say, how do we transform compensation, but how do we build performance management for the first time in the like, right? And so I think that's what you're getting at with your question. But if I'm off track there, let me know.
Yeah, no, that's if you're that organization still doing things the way things have always been done and you're wanting to push forward, I don't know that there's a clear starting point where that would be. And that was kind of where that question you answered a little bit, deconstructing and bringing, consolidating everything down versus sprouting everything up. So let's take the sprouting everything up side for a moment and dig
Mm-hmm.
a little deeper. Where would you start?
The thing I think about is I think HR people right now are being challenged a lot with, if you're a small to medium sized company and it's like a tech company of some sort and you're pretty tech forward, your CEO is talking to all the functions and they're saying, I'm a product function and I've rolled out this new internally built AI tool and it has transformed how we launch new products. And then you talk to your sales team and they say, oh, sales operations has rolled out this new AI product that we built in house and it's transformed the way that we do things, yada, yada, yada. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that those are true and they actually work and there's no flaws to them, which there probably are, right? HR is coming to the table and they're saying, hey, we're still kind of in a wait and see mode to how we deal with this. And they're looking around the room and they're feeling out of step with their peers, right? So what I'm trying to put forward, I'm actually in the process of writing a manifesto on this. I know that sounds crazy, but I actually think some of this is sort of crazy. And so it's a truly transformative time. And if you know you're in a transformative time, you have to meet the moment that you're in. It's like, here's a playbook. Here's how you would meet that moment and say, I don't necessarily believe that, maybe if you have something that's like lower stakes than your own employees, like data, social security numbers, paychecks, like really, really confidential stuff, that, yeah, maybe you can experiment with a lot of that. But what I'm saying is like, what is like core and then what is periphery? And what's core that's like extremely confidential and private, you're probably going to always need to have systems of record and applications that are used to dealing with that, right? But if it's periphery, if it's things that we can experiment with, like a recruiting tool, I mean, you can experiment with recruiting workflows. Like that's not super crazy, right? Unless, again, you're collecting some kind of confidential information in the process. Let's do some, let's vibe code some stuff up. I mean, I don't care. Let's try it out. If it works, if it works, if it doesn't, and then we kind of pivot from there. But I think under that assumption, going back to, like, is people analytics a commodity? What I meant by that is it's not that people analytics necessarily goes from being an extremely expensive philosophy, which it has been, and it has been a luxury item. It just means that it gets priced on the commoditized market, which means it's a lot cheaper than it used to be, right? And so I think that goes for a lot of these different HR applications is they need to start getting priced as a commodity item. And so it's not that they're free, and vibe coding's not free, by the way, either. I think when the cost of tokens starts truly getting passed on to enterprises, which has happened a little bit now, but not to the full extent, you're going to find out that the cost of tokens as compared to the cost of human labor is actually sometimes way off kilter. And tokens are going to be quite expensive compared to human labor. And so, like, a lot of the AI boom is being underwritten by excess investment. And when it starts having to be profitable, which I think is going to happen in the next 1 to 2 years, just by Wall Street's going to start forcing that to happen, you're going to have to understand the tokenomics of your workforce, which is your agents. And if they become not, the cost pressures there start to not be commoditized like they are for human labor, then you're going to have, again, much more tough decisions about, do we deploy a human? Do we deploy a technology? Do we deploy something that we built in house? Do we deploy a commoditized thing that we bought from the market to answer some of these questions? And again, I think most people are actually saying this is a really confusing time. It's hard to keep up. Can somebody just give me the playbook to how to do this effectively? And maybe it's not perfect science, but it's the best that we have for the moment that we're in.
It's experimenting, to use the word you just
Exactly.
used a few minutes ago. It's experimenting.
Yeah.
And with that, one of the assumptions I make with that is that it's not a light switch. If you have this, then you don't have that. Or once you go to this process, you lose that one. You can take steps into that water. You can wade in and kind of determine, is this working for us? And at the same time, the external system around that organization, all those other factors that you're talking about there, they continue to change as well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's unique about me and what the experiences I bring to this role is, as far as I can tell, I'm like one of the few people that has had roles in all four branches of the tree that I mentioned earlier, the tree of values. So the people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, and behavioral science. I have the PhD backing. I've taught at the graduate and undergraduate levels. I've done my own research in a variety of different roles. But I've also worked at startups and mid-sized companies and large companies across a variety of industries. And I've been on the vendor side and I've been on the practitioner side. And so there's just not someone out there other than these AIs that can kind of take from those. I feel like I'm like a walking around like career AI, which is like I've just touched a lot of different problems with HR data from a variety of different angles that it's really difficult to replicate. And so because of that, I just have a lot of the experiences that say, okay, if this, then do this in these variety of different circumstances. And that's just pretty rare. And so it's like, who are you, Cole, to write this manifesto? Who are you to tell us, that we should be doing this? It's like, well, first of all, I've got skin in the game. But secondly, I'm one of the few people that actually has all these experiences that can draw from that's not just theoretical.
And I think the other piece to that is the process by which you're going through this is still very much rooted in a scientific approach. There's elements of hypotheses, of experimenting, of bringing in a variety of factors. That's almost like a lit review would be, where you've looked, or in this case, you've had the firsthand experience in a number of different areas, that what you're bringing in is not hypothetical or theoretical. It's this is what we've seen and how it's progressed over time.
Well, and there's even an additional layer that's not included in the scientific process, which is accountability. If your experiment fails, a lot of times it's like, all right, move on to the next one. But in the real world, like you have to have a pretty high batting average, or they don't ask you to stay around.
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned the way you talk about this, it sounds like it's still something that's shaping, that's evolving day by day. So not just this specific role with HR Bench, but in general with what you've seen and how you continue to engage with it. What's what feels clear already, and what still kind of feels like it's a big question mark, or kind of chipping away at the stone.
Yeah. I think one thing is clear is that, and we've known this for years. Like this is not new. I just think that the 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 criticality of it has increased even more lately. Is siloed data is no longer going to be acceptable. Like you just can't. And it used to be just like siloed internal data. So you have your HCM data, your LMS, maybe some employee surveys or what have you, right? But it's also external data, right? So if you're going to understand your workforce, you have to understand the labor market. And if you're going to understand your technology, you have to be able to get the data out of the tools themselves that are quantifying, again, the inputs, the throughputs, the quality, all the things that I mentioned earlier, right? You cannot afford to have data in silos any longer. I think that is just abundantly clear, and it has to be what I would call AI ready data. So it's not just raw data itself, but it needs to have the metadata, the logic, the reasoning behind it, the what they sometimes call the semantic layer. That is how the LLMs are able to query the data to help you do the analysis more effectively, because it's actually explaining the data to the LLMs, the APIs, the MCPs, like all the different jargon and acronyms. Like you got to have all of that, right? That is abundantly clear. I think the other thing that is clear is that people intuitively know that that AI is going to disrupt. Like I think the most radical thing that you could predict right now is that fast forward 10 years into the future and nothing changed. Like I think that's a pretty like if you went back to like 2005, and between 2005 and 2015, and you said, HR is not going to change at all. It changed a little bit, but did it really change that much? I mean, I'm not trying to be overly critical. It didn't change all that much, right?
Yeah, not yet. Yeah.
And I think like so that would have been a pretty decent bet. The future is going to look like the past. I think that that's a pretty like radical notion at the moment, to say 10 years from now HR is going to look exactly the same as it does today. And so I think that is something that we have pretty general consensus on. What is going to change and how we're going to get there. I think that's where opinions are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. We all have opinions about what that's going to look like. But what it really is going to take is, again, running those experiments, going through the cycles, saying what works, showing what doesn't work, learning from that, and then deploying it in the real world.
Is there something that you are looking most forward to in this process?
Well, I'm looking forward to that I get to influence it. I think one of the uncomfortable things that I learned moving out of, like a PhD program out into becoming a practitioner is it is cool because you do get to have an impact on organizations, but it's also uncool in the sense that you realize how little that impact is sometimes. And so I've always wanted to make a big impact. And I think, what is the way that I can do that? Well, it's got to extend just beyond the four walls of my own organization. It's got to impact a variety of other organizations, and I think, and other people. And so the ability to talk to cool people like you, Matt, but also through my own podcast, through the book that I've written, through the newsletter that I have, I get speaking at conferences, all the different things that people do. I get to influence not just what happens at HR Bench, but I think what happens at HR Bench is going to influence the world. And I get to be a part of that. And that's super exciting.
Well, as somebody who listens to your podcast, reads your Substack, and sees a lot of the posts on LinkedIn, it's encouraging to be able to follow along and see where that's going, to be a part of these conversations, not just to ask questions, but to throw out ideas and to learn with one another, and really see where this is going. I think that you are spot on, that, to use your example of HR from 2005 to 2015 or whatever, yeah, it didn't really change much, but I see it as like an exponential curve where all of a sudden in the last few years it's really skyrocketed, and we don't know how high that's going to go, but we know right now we are in that very disruptive change, and rethinking or reimagining how some of this work gets done using the tools that we have that are moving faster than in a way that the research can keep up. What it sounds like you are in your process is providing some of that research along the way, almost like a Jane Goodall, documenting
Yeah.
how it's happening in real time.
So do you mind if I test something out on you? It's something I've been thinking about for a little while.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mentioned I gave that speech a few years ago. Is people analytics a luxury? And that was pretty provocative. I got a lot of reactions to it, and the thing I noticed after that happened is a lot of my friends, because my friend group is like the people analytics leadership at the top companies in the world. Like that's who I talk to a lot, and a lot of people in my friend group were sort of getting disillusioned with what was going on. So I wrote an article a few years ago about the disillusionment of like top people analytics teams, and nobody liked it. There was no positive reception to it. I was like, okay, what's going on here? And what I realized is, and I'm in kind of actively working towards this, is when you're early to something. So you identify a problem, you identify it before others. You do kind of sound like a crazy person, and then it comes to pass, and then people go, "Oh, okay, you actually identified this. You were just early, right?" And a lot of what I've seen is the people that I know were early to identifying a lot of the layoffs that have happened in the last few years, a lot of the transformation that was coming from AI, and a lot of the disillusionment that came from, is what I got trained to do even relevant? Does it have worth? Do humans have worth? And a lot of the things that people have been wringing their hands with. But the cool thing that I've started to see lately, because again, I think a lot of folks in HR are going through that now, but we went through it years ago because we were early, is within my friend group is starting to see a proactive, empowered future where we're in the driver's seat. And they're starting to see that now. And so I'm actively trying. This is again why I keep saying I'm looking for fellow travelers. I'm looking for people who want to challenge the status quo, who are innovators, who are, because I know that they're the ones who are seeing what I'm seeing, and they're seeing it early, because that this can actually be a truly, again, if you're being proactive, if you're being innovative, this can be an exciting time.
Yeah.
And that is, and again, I don't know if that's scientific or not, but it is something that I'm noticing. And again, if you're out there, if you're a listener to Matt's podcast, you're probably in this camp. I want to hear from you. What is your journey? What are you seeing? Because I think we're probably seeing the same things, and we're seeing it early, and what others are going to come around to a year or two from now. And I think it's going to be an exciting journey.
I love that. And with that, you can only see so much on your own. It's opening that circle and that conversation to others that you can start to learn. And again, it goes back to that systems thing. The system that you build around that has those different perspectives is going to allow you, it's going to give you the opportunity to see what that edge is and where those opportunities are to do a little different, think a little differently around it. So this is a fun and exciting conversation. I could go on for a lot more questions, but I also want to be mindful of your time. So let me ask this: what have we not talked about that you would still want to include in the conversation?
I think I briefly touched on it a second ago, but I think I want to dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which is that the implementation of AI and the processes and procedures. Like, do you use like Claude Code or Cowork or anything like this?
Outside of the yes, I do, but outside of my main job. Yeah.
So unless you're paying like the freaky high rates for some of these accounts, what happens to me almost every day is that I cap out at my token usage, right?
Yep.
And it's because the more complex tasks that you're asking the AIs to engage in, the more iterations it has to run, the more tokens it uses, right? And so ironically, the better you get at using AI, the more likely you are to run out if there's no cap on it, right? And for most organizations, they're like, again, the defrayed cost of these AI tools isn't so much, you're not actually paying for all that token usage, right? When that starts to get passed along, and that's what I called tokenomics. That's why I wanted to explain it really quickly, because I don't think I actually explained it adequately. That's what I mean by tokenomics, is that people are going to have to start comparing the hourly rate of a human to the hourly cost of the tokens that it takes to run a particular task as a one-to-one correlation. and the data points necessary. Like, think about that from a workforce planning deployment perspective. As far as I can tell, maybe there's some organizations that are in the early stages of looking at that type of thing. I think that's going to become common practice. It's going to be forced to become a common practice in the next few years once the cost of the actual tokens starts getting passed along to customers. And so it's not just going to be the barrier of, are your tokens running out for the day? It's how much is every token costing you versus the manpower that it takes to do a particular task. And I think that's going to be a key sticking point that is an inevitability that's coming. And again, the value unit per token could increase over the next few years. So maybe token costs stay the same or token costs go down, but maybe you can get more value per token or something along the lines. But you still have to have some function to measure that over time, equivalent to the cost of human beings and FTEs. Again, typical workforce planning problem that I don't think many people are talking about right now, but is going to be a huge issue in the next few years. And so I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to explain that as well.
Yeah, the I caught myself laughing a little bit because yeah, it's workforce planning, but now it's token force planning,
Yeah.
and if you're not thinking about that, now is a good time to start thinking about it. It's still early enough in the process that things are still in flux. The dust is still kind of flying around, but as it settles, those who have already started this conversation or this interest of what does this look like for us to weigh these or to compare these
Yeah.
elements can be at the forefront.
What gets you excited, Matt? Maybe we go there. Like, are you nervous? Are you excited? Or are you where are you, pensively waiting for what's going to happen? Like, how are you approaching this as a human being yourself?
Something you had mentioned earlier brought this to mind. We have the academic background, the different experiences. If after you finish your degree, you work at whatever job, if you stop learning, stop reading, stop looking forward, you become stagnant. For me, I enjoy these types of conversations, asking the the questions that don't really have the answers yet, the questions that it's like, we don't know what this is going to look like. We're going to try it out. And yes, there's some scientific backing that we can kind of base it on, but a lot of what we're doing doesn't include that or is modified from that. And so for me, the biggest point of both excitement and a little bit of frustration is when you see a lot of the opportunities, these tools or experiments that you can do. But then the question is, can you? Meaning, do you have the permission to do that? Do you have the ability? Do you have whatever you need in order to be able to start bringing some of these in? And that's where it can quickly look like this giant hill to climb.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, we would love to change. Our traditional HR is doing okay, but man, what Cole's talking about sounds great, but it's just such this large hill. Being able to break that down, figuring out what does that first step look like to be able to start moving in that direction and to have a little bit of the safety with that where if we mess up, okay. But I don't know what's worse, trying something and messing up or not trying because you just didn't embrace it.
Well, I think I know that was sort of a rhetorical question, but I'll actually answer it.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
think for most of our careers, not trying something was the risk-free move. And I think this is one of those transformative times where you have to try something. Like, there's like a forcing function going on, which is saying a revolution is underfoot. You need to you need to try new things.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to what you were saying about you know, you might stagnate if you quit learning things. I think like just learning things is so fun,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I hope this comes across as like the like the humble brag that it is. But like on Friday, and this was completely like I was not strategic when I scheduled this. I thought it was so cool. But like I remember in graduate school reading research papers that NASA had done on like teams and like selection for astronauts and those types of things. And the lady who does the astronaut selection for NASA, Suzanne Bell, who's in charge of it, is coming on my podcast this Friday. And
Awesome.
the Artemis missions are going on right now. And
Yep.
those are the people that she selected.
That's
And
pretty
it just
cool.
happened. Yeah, it's so freaking cool. Like I didn't construct this at all, like to be this way.
Yeah.
But I think about it like in terms of I get to learn from the people who I used to like read about in studies. back in graduate school. And that is so stinking cool. And so like, and you don't have to be the person who goes out and books these conversations. Matt, you can empathize. Like the logistics of running a podcast are often unsexy and unfun, but but you can go and listen.
Yeah.
Right? Like all it takes is to have the curiosity and the will to go out and find the people who are talking, the people who are doing amazing things. And it's still happening right now. And you can learn from them. And it's like it's free other than just your time.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing stopping you. And that to me is what is super exciting. Like why be stagnant when you could be learning from people like that? That is so cool.
Something you said earlier about I think it was the manifesto or the book that you may start writing. You said you wanted a playbook, and I'm going to challenge you just a little bit because I don't know.
Well, I didn't say I want a playbook. I said HR leaders want a playbook, and like I want to do the best that I can to help provide that for them.
Right, and that's the challenge. Yes, good correction there. And where my challenge would come in is a playbook makes it easy to stay stagnant. Because once you have that, it's written down, oh, we just follow this checklist for the next 10, 20 years and we're set. And the idea of your playbook is something, it's less about follow this task list and more about here's how you can think differently about it. Here's how the questions that you can ask to these different people that are changing and revolutionizing the way that people analytics works or the way that talent selection works or workforce planning or tokenization, whatever it might be. When you have those questions and you have that interest and that intrigue, that to me is the playbook. It's learning how to have that playbook and be able to operate in that environment.
Yeah, I know some of the efficacy of this book has been challenged over the years, but there used to be a book, it was called First Break All the Rules. And it was for like first-time managers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about like, maybe it's not a playbook, it's more of a checklist. And it's like, first, challenge all your assumptions that you know about how to run HR. Right? And I think most people never make it past step one, right? And so I think that is the kind of guide. If playbook's not the right way of putting it, but like let's just call it like a guide or a mental model of putting out into the world, which is, hey, I'm giving you permission for the first time, maybe ever, to challenge all your assumptions about how HR is occurring and potentially redevelop them. And here are some learnings about how you might do that, right? And again, I think that's in normal people world that maybe that's not that radical, but in HR world, that's a pretty radical notion.
Yeah. Cole, where's the best way for people to follow along with what you're building?
Man, I feel like all I do is I share things with the world. So I don't know, LinkedIn and
Substack,
podcast, newsletter, colenapper.com, hrbench.com, since we're publishing stuff out there as time goes along. Reach out to me directly, listen to, I feel like I'm just constantly talking. I know it's not actually a reality, but it feels that way sometimes. So yeah, there's no shortage if you want to find it, of me saying stuff.
These are good ideas to put out there. So thank you for putting them out there. And thanks for coming back to the Science for Work podcast. This is it's always a good time. And I love the way that you are thinking about things, not just thinking about them, but actually putting them in practice, doing them. So yeah.
Thanks for having me, Matt. And thanks. Keep up the good work. You're doing really good stuff.
I appreciate the compliment, sir. Thanks for listening to the Science for Work podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it or leaving a review. It might just be the opportunity that helps someone else discover evidence-based insights they can use in their work. For more research-backed resources, articles, and tools, or to get involved with the Science for Work community, visit us at ScienceForWork.com. A special thanks to our guest and to the entire Science for Work team. Science for Work is an independent, nonprofit foundation of evidence-based practitioners who want to make work better.